Hi, Patrick Phillip here at Effective Martial Arts HQ in Pointe Claire, West Island of Montreal, Quebec, Canada. And in this lesson, the 4 steps of learning applied to martial arts. All right, so you've most likely heard about this before. If you're into self-help, personal development, there's a bunch of books that talk about this concept. But here are some interesting details and subtleties and how it applies to specifically the martial arts training field of study. So the 4 steps, which you might know already, but if you don't, here they are. Unconscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, conscious competence, and finally, unconscious competence. So, quick overview first. What does this mean? Unconscious incompetence is when you don't know that you don't know. And this applies, by the way, not just to martial arts, of course, but to any area of knowledge that you want to study and any skill that you want to acquire. Unconscious, we start by being unconsciously incompetent in everything. When you're a baby, you don't know that you have stuff to learn, you don't know about the world. So we necessarily start there. And as a civilization as well, as knowledge progresses through the generations, we start always by being unconsciously incompetent in many different areas. Moving forward, and some details on how it applies to martial arts in a moment, we get to conscious incompetence. So that's when we realize that there is things to learn. We realize that we need to absorb this information. Other people know something that we don't. This is more of a switch. It's a mindset. It's a realization that there is things to learn. And it's very important and something that should be cultivated throughout your martial arts journey. I'll expand on this later. Number 3 is when you get to conscious competence. That's essentially when you know how to do something, but it requires conscious thought. It requires all of your focus and attention. And the goal and the methodology is to practice that piece of information, that skill, that technique enough times until it becomes automatic. It becomes ingrained into your muscle memory or into your neural pathways that you're able to do it without conscious effort. And that's when you get to the last step, which is the goal, but not the ultimate goal, because you still need to keep those other steps in mind, more on this later, which is unconscious competence. You want to get to the place where you're able to do the technique, if we're talking about techniques, without conscious effort. It's just your body knows what it needs to do. And that's especially important in martial arts because you don't have time to think in a real situation. So, more details about each one of these steps and how they pertain to martial arts. So, unconscious incompetence. There's 2 facets of this step. The first one is before you've been exposed to martial arts. So maybe as a child, you didn't know that there was martial arts, that there's such a thing as martial arts. Same thing if you don't know there is a particular instrument that you can play in music. You don't know there's something to learn. You don't know about techniques for sales, for instance, or you don't know there are a certain set of techniques that you can apply in social skills. So you are unconsciously incompetent. Not only don't you know how to do the thing, but you also don't know that you don't know. And you ideally don't want to stay here. It's a dangerous place to be, especially when it comes to martial arts. And there's 2, the other facet of this is not just because you haven't been exposed to the information, but just you refuse to acknowledge it. And again, there's 2 possible scenarios in this case. You have the type of person that is a ignorant, arrogant, that thinks they can fight, even though they have no training whatsoever and they've never been in a fight. They're just a tough guy, and they think they can. Oh yeah, I can beat up anyone. That's not the best idea. And if you encounter someone that does have some training and a physical altercation, most likely things will not go your way. But the other more insidious part of unconscious incompetence as it pertains to martial arts is what we call fantasy martial arts. People who practice, and this is an unfortunate reality, which is, I would say, not as common as it was before in the world today because of the spread of information and the internet and the popularization of mixed martial arts competitions. People have much more of an understanding of which martial arts works and which not, which don't. But some people still practice martial arts that are not pressure tested, where the techniques have never been applied and there's no proof of the techniques being applied in a no rules or minimal rules situation to prove their effectiveness. And what happens in this case is that people practice, let's say, katas all day, and they practice maybe applications with a partner, but a partner that is cooperating. And they think that by doing this enough, eventually they'll be able to learn to be able to fight. And there's nothing that could be further from the truth. If you want to learn to fight, you have to fight. But there's an important distinction to be made as well, and probably one of the reasons why some fantasy martial arts do not practice pressure testing, because they think you have to learn whatever techniques that you do and then throw yourself into a real fight. And this is not the best idea in terms of ensuring your safety and your progression as a martial artist. We apply a certain concept, and you should as well in your training, which is progressive resistance. You want your techniques to be pressure tested, yes, but you want that resistance and that pressure to be progressive for optimal improvement for your students. So learning a technique on your own, doing it on your own, is a necessary first step. You need to have the body mechanics, the body movements necessary for the application of a technique, whether it be a strike, a punch, or kick, a takedown defense, guard pass, guard retention, submission defense. You need to know what to do with your body in that situation on your own first, how to move your body, before you're able to apply it with a partner. The next step is to apply it on a partner that is cooperating to some extent, that will facilitate your execution of the technique so that you're able to do it. Moving forward, you do want to increase the resistance incrementally, where now the partner is not completely letting you do the technique. They are maybe resisting a little bit. You could go 10, 20, 30% resistance in terms of strength and speed of reaction. But I would say it's a mistake to go full contact sparring when you haven't gone through that progression. There will be a time for somewhat realistic sparring where you're going to hit pretty hard and you're going to actually be going for that submission. But with proper training methods, you can still remain safe in that context, but know that your techniques actually work. So, getting a little bit off track here, we'll talk about this more later. There's a lot of stuff to be said about this area, but if you are unconsciously incompetent, is not a place that you want to be. You want to know that there are techniques to learn, and that's when you get to conscious incompetence. You know that you don't know. And this is, like I said, a mindset. It's a switch. It's a realization. But more importantly, it's a mindset that you want to keep throughout your martial arts journey. I think that's the most important thing. If you want to keep on growing, you have to be going back to steps 2, 3, and 4 over and over again. And to a certain extent, step number 1 as well, because you're always going to be exposed to new information. And as soon as you want to make that switch instantly to conscious incompetence, knowing that, ooh, there's this new thing. Now I want to learn it. So keeping yourself curious, keeping yourself engaged and mentally aware of the things there is to know is a really important thing and mindset to cultivate for yourself. And that's basically what science is all about. So you hear like top astrophysicists and theoretical mathematics geniuses that say that all the time. They say like, yeah, we know nothing. They know a whole bunch of stuff, but there's a saying that goes, the more you know that you don't know. So it's the same with martial arts. The more you're exposed to the fields of martial arts, and it's been my experience, the more I learn, the more I know that, whoa, there is so much to learn, and it keeps on evolving. That's the beautiful thing about it. People are always coming up with new techniques, new strategies, and you see this guy win in a certain way, and everybody turns their attention to it and say, oh my God, that was crazy. And that's how the field keeps evolving, and I think that's a healthy thing. And it's something that should be applied in any area of your life, but specifically martial arts, you want to stay consciously incompetent. So you need to realize and accept the fact that you don't know everything. Constantly, even when you become very, very good. I think that's essential. So conscious incompetence is the second step. Third step is conscious competence. And this is really important. This is where we spend most of our time for practicing. It's important for you to realize, if you're a beginner, it's really important for you to realize that just learning a technique does not mean that you now know the technique, and it certainly does not mean that you can apply the technique. You just know it, but you haven't practiced it enough. It hasn't been unconscious yet. You haven't graduated to the fourth step where you are now able to apply the technique. So how do you acquire conscious competence? Again, a little tangent over here. As it pertains to martial arts, you want to be able to absorb information and learn techniques. And there's many different ways you can do that. You can go to class and listen to your instructor teaching a technique. Hopefully a technique that is an actual technique that actually works. More on this later on how to distinguish, but to make it super simple, a technique is considered effective, or it will work, if it has been demonstrated over and over again to have worked on qualified resisting opponents. And the percentage of success of that technique is significant. That's when we know it's effective. If you see a demonstration of a technique and the person getting the technique done to them, look at that person. If they're not resisting at all, or they even seem to be going with the technique, that means there might be something wrong with technique, especially if it's demonstrated like that all the time and you never see it applied against somebody who's actually resisting. Okay, so more on this later, getting sidetracked. But conscious competence, how do you gather information? So you can go to class, you can listen to your instructor, you can see what he's explaining, you can observe, hopefully take notes after, absorb the information, drill the techniques, and practice it in different contexts, increase the resistance incrementally, and eventually get to unconscious competence with that technique. You can also watch videos. This is really important, and we encourage our students to really take the time to study techniques. We're going to talk about this later because this is huge, but I think that study time is perhaps one of the most underrated aspects of martial arts training. You can go a very long way by watching information through video. It's a beautiful time that we live in today. It's part of the reason that we started this channel here on YouTube. There's so much information, there's so much valuable knowledge to absorb that we wanted to give back, and we want to make that accessible and hopefully contribute something to that area so that people can keep on growing and can grow that field of knowledge for everybody's benefit and for the benefit of humanity ultimately. So yeah, you can study techniques through video. And if you do, think about the amount of time that you're actually, quote unquote, studying in class. Maybe the instructor demonstrates a technique for 5, 10, 15 minutes out of the hour. He's actually demonstrating and explaining or giving you feedback. If you take private classes, perhaps that's a little bit more, that's a bit longer. But how much time can you study if you're just chilling at home and watching videos? Instead of watching Game of Thrones or any show that you want to watch, when you have the mental energy and the willpower, study techniques. If your goal is to master martial arts, take the time to study. So if you do so, you will improve a lot faster because you'll have that knowledge. You will be consciously competent in those techniques, and that's where you need to absorb it, take notes, organize the information in your mind, and then practice it over and over again. And that's what we do in martial arts training, is we go through the conscious competence phase over and over again, and there's no other way to get to the last phase than to repeat, 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 and repeat until you no longer think about it. It's ingrained in your muscle memory, your body knows the technique, and then you can graduate to the next step. Now, when you get to the last step, which is unconscious competence, which is the goal in a certain sense, you're not done. Because think about it. We go through that process over and over again for every technique and every layer of technique as we grow in our skill set and our knowledge in martial arts. For example, you never knew how to punch before, and now you learn how to throw a proper jab. Great. You'll need to think about it. You'll need to go slowly at first. You'll need to, when you're executing, okay, is my stance correct? Where's my weight? Are my hips moving? Is my shoulder in place? Is my chin tucked? Am I reaching full extension? Is my fist in proper position? Where's my protection hand? Am I breathing out? There's a lot of things to think about. Until you've practiced it enough that now that technique is automatic, you need to think about it. Once you're done and your jab becomes just a jab, it's no longer a series of steps. It's just one thing that you throw, boom, right out there. Then that frees up your conscious mind to think about something else. So if your jab is now unconsciously competent, you're unconsciously competent at throwing a jab, now you can think about your follow-ups. You can think about your combinations. You can think about your distance. You can think about your angles. You can think about your strategy. You can think about your takedown defense. You can think about analyzing the opponent's reactions. You can only do that if your conscious mind has been freed up through sufficient amount of practice at the previous step of conscious competence. Same thing for a submission. If you're practicing on controlling your body, going for an armbar, where am I putting my hips? Where am I going for the crossface? Sweeping, getting the grip, breaking the grip. You're thinking about those steps. If you've done it enough times, now you can think about your follow-ups. You can analyze what the opponent's reaction is. What's the best option from here? You can think many steps ahead only if you've been through the reps, been through the motions, and you've freed up your conscious mind. And you go through that process over and over again as you add layers of complexity to your martial arts skills. And it's a very fun and beautiful thing. So there's another thing to remember that's very important, especially if you want to transition that knowledge to other people, if you are a coach or an instructor. And by the way, I encourage everyone, and we do so in our school, we encourage people to share knowledge amongst themselves. Even lower belts, yellow belts, orange belts, if they have a couple months experience and they've learned something and they're practicing with a white belt that doesn't know anything, we encourage them to share the information that they've learned in order to help that other person improve. Why? Because one, it multiplies the instructors, so the knowledge gets spread more quickly, but also it helps both participants. It helps the person explaining the technique. There's Stephen Covey in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, one of my favorite books, really goes into detail in this. And at the beginning of his book, he says, approach this book, absorb this information, even if you don't intend to, as though you were going to teach it. And this is a really helpful concept to have in mind when you are absorbing information. And it's a good exercise to do to actually transfer that information to another person. So we encourage our students to do so. If you do so, you're forced to break it down and to go back to the conscious competence level to know what are the building blocks of that technique or that particular skill set that you want to develop or that you have developed and you want to help somebody else develop. And it'll help you get faster through unconscious competence. Furthermore, being a great athlete does not necessarily equate to being a great coach. Why? Because a lot of athletes don't know what they're doing. You can actually forget the steps to a technique. If you've done it enough times, it becomes unconscious, you can forget the steps. And that's somewhat of a benefit because now you can free your mind to think about other stuff. But the problem is now if you want to teach it to someone, you say, oh yeah, just throw a jab. And then the person does all kinds of mistakes. Their shoulders are too low, their chin is too high, they're not engaging their hips, they're not properly based on the ground. And then you really don't know. You're just like, no, punch harder, dude. But you don't know what specifically is the problem because to you, it's unconscious. It's a jab. But you haven't taken the time to break it down. So that's why if your goal is to transfer that information and to be the best practitioner that you want to be, that you can be, and also a great instructor or coach, you need to take the time to go back to conscious competence in the different techniques that you teach to beginners and allow them to understand the building blocks of the technique to graduate and reach the level of unconscious competence in that technique. Furthermore, again, if you are helping other people learn the techniques, or if you're a beginner yourself and you've just learned a technique, do not go faster then you are able to do it well. So what we say to our students is go as fast as you are able to do it well. And keep on going as fast as you're able to do it well. And just a little bit fast, push that limit. But don't go so fast that you botch the technique. And as an instructor, you have to be able to recognize that. You don't want to just be in front of the class and count the reps and everybody's doing the techniques all crooked. We get that all the time here with people coming in, students, and they say, oh yeah, I went to that school and then the instructor was in front, he was just calling the reps, he wasn't giving any feedback, and the students in class, they really didn't learn anything. And that's a poor job in terms of a martial arts instructor. You want to have your attention focused on your students, and you do not want to allow them to get away with any neglect in their techniques. So let's say you're practicing a technical get-up of all things. That's what we actually did today in class. And you notice the position of the feet is not right, and the students are not quite getting it, that technique on that day. Slow it down. Stop him. Okay, now stop. Okay, correct your stance. Actually place him and get him to do the technique only at the speed at which they're able to do it correctly. Once they are, then you can go faster. Okay, so more on this later. How to teach martial arts is one of my favorite subjects, but essentially it's really important. If you want to call yourself a good instructor or a good coach, you have to understand what's going on in a student's mind and how to properly help them grow through the ranks and through their skill set, to build their skill set in terms of martial arts techniques, whatever the style that you practice. So there you have it, guys. That's pretty much all I had to say about this subject. So quick recap. Unconscious incompetence is where you don't want to be. It's necessary at the beginning. We all start there for some reason or another. Before we know anything, we don't know anything. But you want to graduate really quickly to conscious incompetence. And to a certain respect, you want to stay in conscious incompetence. You want to have that mindset of growth and knowing that there's always more information out there. There's always ways to improve your skill set. There's always things that you can learn to make yourself better in martial arts and in anything else that you want to do in life in general. Staying curious. That's a possible pitfall. Some people, they get good at something and they reach a stage where they think good enough. You see that it's quite common. People reach a black belt in whatever style and they stop learning. And that's a really unfortunate thing in terms of martial arts, and I think it does a disservice to yourself as a martial artist, and it doesn't really go into the mentality of martial arts, and it's certainly not a good thing for your students. If you're going to teach, you better keep on learning, always, because there's no other way to keep your mind and your techniques sharp than by constantly absorbing information and staying curious. Know that you don't know. Know there is more things to know. That's really important. Next, conscious competence is basically the mindset of knowing what to do, knowing the information. So you want to absorb the information however you can through videos, attending class, watching fights. Watching professional fights is really important. That's going to help you absorb information and see in real time what's the application of the techniques. It helps you acquire those habits. And the last one is once you've absorbed the information, you've practiced it over and over again, it becomes unconscious. So you get unconsciously competent at something, and that's where your conscious mind is now free to learn something else and to add layers on top of that particular technique, for instance. So there you have it, guys. Hope you've enjoyed. If you have any questions regarding this topic or other topics, please leave it in comments below. Click like if you have not already. Subscribe to our channel if you have not already. If you are a returning subscriber, thank you very much for being here and being part of this community. And yeah, share this link if you think other people might benefit from this information. Hopefully we'll see you on the next one. We've got lots of powerful concepts and messages and techniques and tutorials and breakdowns and all very good stuff coming your way. Really excited about this. So we'll see you on the next one. Once again, Patrick Phillip here at Effective Martial Arts HQ in Pointe Claire, West Island of Montreal, Quebec, Canada. Thank you very much for watching. Practice well.